Right. Good morning, everybody. It's great to start the tournament again on a Sunday morning. So today it's really fitting that we're talking about Taiwan in this place, and we're very proud as our government bench to propose to you the motion that we believe that the Taiwanese government should abandon all moves towards formal independence today. Now, what is the problem here? What context are we talking about? The problem essentially, as I think we can all identify, is the tension that has been going on for decades between China, mainland China, as well as Taiwan. And we think that why are we proposing this motion now, right? There are three main reasons why we're proposing this motion now. First of all, historical context, because there is no longer the kind of oppression or the kind of strong negative sentiment that exists between China and Taiwan that is necessary today, and that is why we propose for change. Secondly, economic context, because of the increasing dependence not just of Taiwan, but of most other Northeast Asian countries, or in fact many other countries in the world, on China. We think that it's in fact beneficial for Taiwan to abandon its move towards formal independence. And finally, on political context, because geopolitics in Northeast Asia has changed today, and China has emerged as clearly the greatest player, and we think that it would be advantageous for Taiwan as well. So, before I move on to my model, I'm just going to give you an outline of my case. First, I'm going to go more in depth into the dependence of Taiwan on China before moving on to the geopolitical context of Northeast Asia. And my partner is afterwards going to expand more on the idea of the security dilemma as well as domestic politics within Taiwan. But before I move on, what's the model we're going to use here? What we're proposing as the government is to use a model that is very similar to when Hong Kong was returned back to China in 1997. Because what happens is that even though Hong Kong is now formally a part of China, it is seen as a special administrative region, which means that for 50 years it's legalized under legislation, that nothing will be changed in Hong Kong in terms of legislation, in terms of elections, in terms of financial policy within Hong Kong and so on, which means that effectively, as proposed by the motion, what we're seeing is that while Taiwan is abandoning formal independence in name, in terms of not being able to get a seat in the UN, which we don't think is incredibly useful for Taiwan anyway, but it will still be able to remain autonomous in most important areas that are key to Taiwan's interests, such as domestic policies, financial policies, and so on, because as you see in the model like Hong Kong, they managed to retain their own currency, their own customs union and custom policies, taxation policies, and so on. And we propose the same thing for Taiwan, for Taiwan's case. And we think that this would be beneficial because Taiwan will be able to maintain its own distinctive cultural and identity, as well as its key policy areas, yet be able to enjoy the economic and security benefits that will be proposed as a result of this greater rapprochement with China. Before I go on,
I think the case of the Hong Kong and Taiwan is completely different because they find themselves their historical identity from different person. Chinese people find their identity from Mao Zedong, and Taiwanese people find their identity from Chiang Kai-shek.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that, yes, that might be incredibly relevant 50 years ago, but today, I think we on the side of the government think that the economic benefits and the political benefits far outweigh the kind of historical background that happens 50 years ago. And if you look at the will of the people today, more people are interested in the kind of benefits that could be enjoyed with this motion. And I'm going to show you later on in my substantive why this is more important than the kind of historical baggage that people want to forget because they no longer want to remember all these difficult things that have been happening. So first of all, on dependence on China, this comes twofold, right? First, economically as well as politically. I'm going to first go on the economic point. There are three main areas where Taiwan will be able to benefit as a result of greater rapprochement with China, which would come naturally if independence almost towards formal independence, right? Because right now there's so much tension between the two areas, and it's just maybe a few years ago that Chinese people could travel freely to Taiwan. And we think that with this move, first of all, in terms of production, right? We know that China is more or less the factory of the world, and Taiwan so far has not been able to benefit from, even though they are right next to China, Taiwan has not been able to benefit from the kind of cost advantage that they could have if they shift production to China. This would not mean like an excessive loss of jobs in Taiwan, right? Because we see that most countries do the same thing and they are working just fine. And so what we see here is that if this motion were to pass, what happens essentially in Taiwan is that they would have a greater cost advantage, greater production advantage as a result of cheaper cost of production, and this would greatly improve their industries and their production, and this will lead to a greater increase in GDP for Taiwan. And secondly, you also get a bigger access to a bigger market. We know that China is like the most populous country in the world. India is coming after, but the point is that China is right next to Taiwan, and it would be a shame if Taiwan were not to capitalize on such a big comparative advantage, because right now other countries such as in Southeast Asia, they are also trying to target a big market such as China, but they might fail where Taiwan might succeed simply because of geographical proximity, because we know that transport cost is an integral part of economics, and that it normally accounts for a great cost, and we see that with such close proximity between Taiwan and China, Taiwan should be able to capitalize on that. Finally, on the idea of non-barriers to trade, right? Because right now, like for example, we have a teammate from China who came with us to this tournament. The visa process was horrendous. And if you look at not just the visa process as well as other things such as taxation and so on, if we take away these, if the motion were to pass, what happens is that these barriers to trade will no longer exist, or at least be minimalized. This means that trade could go on between Taiwan and China much more freely, and we think that that's an excellent thing. Secondly, politically speaking, Taiwan is now incredibly dependent on the US, right? And we see that that might be a negative thing, and we think that it's time for Taiwan to wean off its US backing, and we think that this is extremely important. Furthermore, if you look at the trade ties that Taiwan has, which are very close with places such as Hong Kong and Singapore, which are also incredibly reliant on China. So what happens is that if push comes to shove, if China were to make these places make a choice between China and Taiwan, these places such as Singapore and Hong Kong would choose China and not Taiwan. And what happens is that this means that Taiwan is going to lose a great deal of investment, a great deal of foreign investor backing. Finally, in terms of geopolitical context, which my partner will extend on later, we see that Japan used to be the market leader of Southeast Asia, but it's no longer the case today because China is now indisputably the one. And so this means that with this policy, essentially what we see is that Taiwan will be able to leech on to the strongest backer in Northeast Asia, and we think that that's an extremely good thing, both economically and politically for Taiwan, and for all these reasons, we are very proud to propose this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, let's take a look at what the government team has shown you so far. They have told you that Taiwan should abandon all these independence acts because, well, there's a bigger market out there for them, and they can, benefit. And their dependency, that problem can also be solved. Our opposition team sees that these things also have alternatives, and they are simply proposing the same consensus while jeopardizing a national stance that the government has to pursue and respect for the people. That is our main stance, because the reason why the government is there and what a democracy should be are the values that should be respected, and therefore that is why we are standing upon this podium to oppose to this motion. I, as the leader of opposition, will bring upon why this is a detrimental harm to democracy, and the deputy leader of opposition will go deeper into the aspects of how it will be detrimental to the people of Taiwan. But before I go on to any constructives, please let me point out a few faults from the former speaker's speech. Well, first of all, let's take a look at her model. We have 3 points of refutation towards this. First of all, she said that this will be very similar to the case of Hong Kong. But first of all, as POI has already mentioned, we can clearly see the identity and the stance of the very people that were actually made in Taiwan is the very fact that they believe, thank you, ma'am, they believe that instead of Mao Zedong, they actually believe that Chen Shui-bian is the actual leader, the leader of China. That's why they named their country as the Republic of China in the very first place. They still have that stance that opposes, and that is a very different case from the case of Hong Kong, as we can see. And also, as I'm going to explain to you later on, the case regarding Taiwan and China is also a case between democracy and communism. although we can say that they will respect their legislation and whatnot, we can clearly see that these two stances are fundamentally different, and they still have open places for of conflict regarding these aspects. And also, seeing the very case of Hong Kong itself, we can clearly see that the Hong Kong case was not so successful as we can see, because before the 1990s, before Hong Kong was actually placed into China, there were many articles criticizing China and pointing out its faults. However, as the process continued and as their models somehow succeeded, the articles regarding criticism and pointing out the faults of China have already disappeared. So we can clearly see that this is a situation where the influence of China has actually increased within Hong Kong. Although they say that they respect their legislation and let them do what they want, we can clearly see that the influence is still there, and that can propose a negative consensus regarding that the fundamental differences still lie between Taiwan and China. And also, her argument regarding a bigger market, she said that a bigger market can be opened. First of all, we have 2 points of refutation towards this. First of all, we can already have the alternative exporting. The reason that the proposal that they are making is entering a market that already has an alternative, which is only having the price tag of jeopardizing a nation's stance. The reason why a nation is there, and also having troubles because the nations are fundamentally different regarding them. And also, the second point would be that saying that there is a bigger market, we can clearly see that the benefits are much smaller than the harms that are to follow, because the market regarding China in the global perspective is fundamentally different. It's a fundamentally different stance from Taiwan, because people regarding the Chinese market see it as large quantities in cheap prices. They see it as a large market where products are produced at cheap prices. Yes, ma'am.
So what if it's large quantities of goods produced at cheap prices?
Yes.
That is what everybody does, and everybody buys from China.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Because they are cheap and produced in large amounts, people perceive the made in China aspect as a slightly negative consensus. On the other hand, thank you, ma'am. On the other hand, Taiwan produces computer and other computer products and chips. These products also rely on the aspect of high quality and high prices and less quantity, which is opposing to the economic stance of China itself. So we can see that if this is collaborated within the market of China, the stances are very different. So there are many harms that we can see. And also regarding the point of dependency, the reason why Taiwan was able to dodge the influence of China was because the USA was helping to Taiwan in the very first place. But in this case, we're actually opening Taiwan open to China. So let me go on to my constructives. My argument will be made in 3 levels of analysis. First of all, what is a democracy? Second, what would passing the motion mean? And third, what are the problems analyzed? First of all, what is a democracy? We can simply say it is a form of governing people. But we would like to say it is a form of governing people where everybody's opinions are respected, including the minorities and, of course, the majorities. Because, first of all, it is because we need to gather a more stable society where less people feel left out and they feel that they actually have a playing role within their societies. And also, representation of the people can only be made when the ideas of the individuals are actually gathered and the nation can see what the individuals are thinking regarding the situation. Now, the second level of analysis would be, why would passing this motion be what would passing this motion mean? This motion is harmful because Taiwan is divided into 2 groups: independence and opposing independence. These factors mean that people wanting independence, they're not simply following a blind popular propaganda. They have reasons why they want to become independent. They want to become independent. It's because, first of all, regarding historic regions, as I said before, the reason why Taiwan was made in the first place is because they believe Chen Shui-bian is the actual leader of China, and they do not accept certain norms of China. And also, there are also practical reasons because their political structure is fundamentally different, as I had explained to you before, regarding the difference between democracy and communism. And also, there are many different stances regarding the national society, because China does not actually accept Taiwan as a legitimate nation in the very first place. And so what this means that people have their very reasons why they are opposing to this and why they want to become independent regarding this very first place. And we can clearly see that there are not a minority, and that is quite a large portion of the population within the society. And as a democracy, the government has an obligation to see to that these people's opinions are actually reflected within the national consensus. But passing this motion, according to the government, would be ignoring the very reason of democracy, ignoring the people that we can see. So the problems analyzed is very simple. It does not fully represent the people and ignores the way the people are there, and ignores the national consensus, ignores the reason why the country is made in the very first place. So seeing this, we can all clearly say that there are many harms following this motion, and that's the reason why we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Right, I thank the speaker for this speech, and now I invite the second speaker from the government, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, without the backing of active United States participation in the independence of Taiwanese movement, and without the strong consensus between Taiwanese people, we're very concerned about what the opposition is proposing for formal independence. And we don't understand on how this practically will work in the future, or will come into force and will work fine. We don't think any kind of explanation was done by the leader of opposition. But before I move on to my 3 points in this debate, let me move on to a few rebuttals going to the leader of the opposition. So they firstly said, well, because Taiwanese and Hong Kong have defined different routes in the history, if they should, Taiwanese should have formal independence. Mrs. Chair, my Prime Minister already told you that in the current status quo, people don't really care about what kind of historical roots they find. They had a strong sentiment in the past, Mr. Chair, but this sentiment has changed over time in 50 years, and we think that this is a new context that we have right now. And this answers the questions why now they have to defy the formal independence. But the secondly, they told you, well, there are fundamental differences because there are democracy and there are differences between democracy and communism. Mr. Chair, this is exactly the context. The tension between democratic nation and a communist nation was where oppression from a Chinese government to Taiwanese government came from. But this kind of rhetoric has been gradually watering away as time overwent, and therefore we don't see we don't see oppression in today's society towards Taiwanese people, and this is why, Mr. Chair, we think that this kind of informal independence is not really feasible. But the third thing he told you was that, well, Hong Kong was not successful. Mr. Chair, we firstly think there are practical benefits which Hong Kongese have right now. For example, as my partner told you, like the legislation, independent currency, and those kinds of free trade agreements they can do with their autonomy. But also we think that there are practically more democracy in Hong Kong right now as they wanted in before, right? Because we think that this is a successful model which Taiwanese government should have been targeting as long before. But the second thing he told you was that, well, there are alternatives when Taiwan doesn't really trade with China. We say we have two responses to this. Firstly, we think that China, given the very strong economic power in the international society, have strong power in retaliating those kind of Taiwanese government once they have this kind of formal independence. They can also threaten other countries to not have trades with Taiwan if they want to, as we can see in the formal retaliatory measures done by China. We think that this is very detrimental to Taiwan. But secondly, they told you about computer chips and Chinese market won't be very useful for Taiwan. No, thank you. Those kind of computer chips are the ones that Taiwanese should have access to Chinese market even more without barriers to trade, Mr. Chair, because China has rare earth materials. They're mostly sole producer of those kinds of materials and also the biggest producer, right? They have these kinds of rare earth materials that use the computer chips, which Taiwan greatly depends on. And we think that this is another reason why they should have not formal independence and gain the model of Hong Kong. But another thing they told you, well, most people in Taiwan want have a national consensus in promoting this kind of formal independence. This is wrong, Mr. Chair. As we can see in Taiwanese sentiment, the very sentiment is that only a small population is concerned about this issue, and most of the majority of the population is still politically apathetic to this issue. So the idea of only taking consideration into small population's opinion and forcing this kinds of opinion towards the government to have this kind of formal independence is very wrong, because it sacrifices the will of the majority who doesn't really know about the issue right now. So we don't think that this kind of formal independence is the move that we have to retract right now. No, thank you. Now moving on to my first point on how this is harming the security dilemma of the region. In the status quo, Mr. Chair, we think that there are very strong tensions between the countries inside Northeast Asian region. Why? Because in the status quo, there are military power security dilemma between the nations. Because the United States has its armed military bases in South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, and this strengthens the tensions between the nations. And if we gain a formal independence for Taiwan, it means that the stronger military power Taiwanese might get in the future, Mr. Chair, because they can develop their own weapons without the scrutiny of Chinese government. And we think that this kind of security dilemma strengthens the rhetoric of Chinese government and Chinese extremist right-wing movements to actually go against minorities inside China and also Taiwan in the future. But another argument when there is clear harm, that there is clear harm done to Taiwanese people, we have 2 points of analysis. First, we think that it is strengthening the nationalist sentiment of the general public, because they right now have a strong notion of one China policy, right? That is why they have these kinds of efforts to integrate minorities inside their own societies. And we think that furthermore, we have seen in Chinese government the extreme right-wing views promoted in Chinese government. We think that if this kind of formal independence is to be proposed and pass today's debate, we think that these kinds of strong nationalist sentiment will be even stronger inside China. But the third thing we want to tell you about, Mr. Chair, is about how you gain state sovereignty. We think that this kinds of arbitrary succession movement from Chinese government shows a very bad precedent towards other nations in the future. Because right now, Mr. Chair, the only case with International Court of Justice agreed on gaining new state sovereignty for other nations was when there was oppression. But in Taiwanese cases, in today, Mr. Chair, we don't see any oppression. We think that this kind of arbitrary line drawing in today's case is not really something of a good precedent which other international society wants to build. Because there are other independence movements in other nations, such as Kurds in Turkey and Syria, such as Quebec in Canada. But you don't have the necessary principle and practicality in gaining all kinds of succession movements, state sovereignty into international society. And furthermore, Mr. Chair, and the last point of my speech is that how Taiwanese people won't like this kind of policy once the economic and political benefits are annulled because they gain formal independence, because China can have retaliatory measures, and we're very proud to propose.
You're here.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the Parliament, and ladies and gentlemen, there's a country called People's Republic of China, and there's a country called we are now in Republic of China. And there's a reason behind why people call it differently, by putting in peoples or not. It's just like Korea. I'm from the Republic of Korea, and the people on the north side of the Korean peninsula live in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So we think there's clearly some kind of different identity, historical identity behind this, but even in the names of the country, and even in the basic standard of the basic stance line of the government, and basic sentiment of the people, when there's a clear difference between this PRC and ROC, then we think that abandoning all moves toward the former independence is just like the abandoning what people think, even though Taiwan is a democratic government, ladies and gentlemen. So behind this stance of line, we think that it's not a good chance, it's not a good thing to abandon all moves toward the former independence of Taiwanese government.
Sir?
Oh, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we think, before I move on to my argument, why in many aspects, this actually abandons the Taiwanese people as just like the irresponsible government, let me please make some rebuttals about this kind of tension argument that Deputy Prime Minister came up with. She talked about the tension is being caused and because it raises the nationalist sentiment of the China and Taiwan. Well, we think that, so what's so problematic about people trying to fight for independence, even causing some tension, ladies and gentlemen? Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people fight for independence nowadays. A lot of ethnic minorities, such as if you take a look at Chechen in Russia, they also fight for independence, even though Russian government does never allow to. And a lot of Kurd people in Turkey, in Iraq, also fight for their independence. And nobody criticizes them just because they are causing, ladies and gentlemen, tension, ladies and gentlemen. We think some kind of perspective, different view or perspective just make them criticize for this. But just because they cause some tension, we cannot criticize some people just because they fight for their independence, they fight for their historical identity, which will be elaborated further in my argument. Yes, ma'am.
We're not criticizing people, we're simply saying that it will be more beneficial for the Taiwanese as well as the region for Taiwan to abandon its formal independence.
Yes, because that's what all governments should argue for, that there are more economic benefits that overweigh the harm. Well, we'll say to you in my argument that plus to his argument, relatable to his argument, that actually harms are bigger than the benefits because this, let me tell you. So, first of all, why it abandons Taiwanese people in the first of the historical aspect? This has been already debated for a long time between these two debaters and three debaters. But, ladies and gentlemen, so in historically, just the fundamental basis of the fundamental root of Taiwan and China is different. When you go to the Taiwanese history teacher's lesson, you can see that Taiwanese history teachers teach you that the fundamental root of the Taiwanese government and Taiwanese nationality is from Chen Shui-bian, who fought against Mao Zedong, and Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that what they say is that what they say to Taiwanese people is to become one nation to the people who their ancestors fought against, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, my ancestor fought against the Chinese government, and now do I have to become one? Do I have to become a civility to the nation, ladies and gentlemen, once an enemy? So we think that the historical identity, what Taiwanese government has taught to the Taiwanese children and Taiwanese people, is just completely different from what now they're trying to pursue. So we think that the historical identity, which is very important, that you identify yourself, is becoming confused. You confuse others, and we think that that's a great problem for the Taiwanese people, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that this kind of thing cannot be done. Ladies and gentlemen, in the paper bill of People's Republic of China, the face of Mao Zedong is drawn. And we think that itself is completely shows how the historical identity is completely different between two nations. And we don't think that just because ignoring that, only the response they came up was that, oh, there are more benefits than them. Just because of that, we don't think that you can just abandon the historical identity of some people. Because it's still something that you identify yourself with, and we think each nation's duty to protect the national identity. And secondly, we think the government system's political thing is completely different. Because they came up with an example of the Hong Kong. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, they characterize Hong Kong case just like that. Freedom is king, legislation is just there, and now a lot of systems are kept in Hong Kong. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is completely different after the Hong Kong got eliminated into People's Republic of China. Because, as our leader opposition already told you about articles, how the criticism has decreased seriously, and about the case, and also the fundamentally democratic and autocratic system that the People's Republic of China has is completely different. Even though maybe Taiwan can keep some system, but the situation will be completely different. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of publishing, which the democratic government guarantees for you in Taiwan, will be completely suppressed by the Chinese government. Because, ladies and gentlemen, even though China can say that, oh, I will keep your system, but because China will intervene into the system of Taiwanese government, even though a little bit, well, it's impossible now because Taiwan has an independent government right now. So we think that some kind of intervention will cause at least a huge change into the democratic system of the Taiwan. And Taiwanese people have lived over 50 years in a democratic nation, ladies and gentlemen. Why the situation has to be suddenly changed and confuse these people, ladies and gentlemen? We think that this is a very action of the irresponsible government. Now let me move. So we think that this political difference is also another reason for not to abandon all moves toward former independence. Because abandoning all moves toward former independence is just like accepting that now it's ready to get assimilated into China. Now, about the economical aspect, we think that economical benefits do not exist, but there are only economical harms. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Taiwan, as a Korean, I know a lot of companies. Well, I don't memorize the name, but I know a very good Taiwanese company that produces good motherboards for good computer chips, and I have a quite positive image about Taiwan because of the brand power, because of the powers. But ladies and gentlemen, if it gets assimilated into China, because China does not have that kind of popular company or brand power, we think that the image of the Taiwan will be changed into that kind of image of China, and we think that causes a more negative aspect for Taiwanese people and Taiwanese economy. Because Taiwanese brand image will be lowered a lot. So we think that the economical benefits do not exist, but we think that more harm will be done with the economic aspect for the Taiwan. And another is that what people think, ladies and gentlemen. We think a lot of Chinese government, China is composed of a lot of ethnicities and a lot of people, diverse people. And we think that Taiwan, because it has been independent for over 50 years, we think that what people think about Taiwan is also the problem within China and Taiwan. So because of this reason, we're very positive. Thank you.
Right, I thank the speaker for his speech, and now I invite the first speaker for closing governments, the member of the House.
We believe that the question that we should be asking today is whether is Taiwan ready to be on its own? Will it be okay? Will Taiwan be okay? Will it be strong, stable, and safe after if the proposal passes through and Taiwan becomes an independent country, right? And on the side government, we believe that that is not the case. We believe that once Taiwan becomes an independent country, it will do Taiwan more harm than good. So our unique extension we have two unique extensions from side closing. The first one is how it would affect the economic relations between China and Taiwan itself, and secondly, how it would actually affect the defense mechanism, the defense system of Taiwan as we see it today, right? But before that, let me move on to some rebuttals. The second speaker from the opening opposition, he was going on and on about how it's important for the nation to know its historical basis, and it's because of these historical issues, right? Taiwan should gain independence and totally break off ties with China. But we believe that there's a reason why history its history and it's meant to stay in the past. Of course, we recognize that they should know about this history, but the thing is, Mr. Speaker, we are moving on, we are moving forward. Why are they trying to bring these negative sentiments from the past into the present and make things worse between make the relations between China and Taiwan worse? We believe what they are doing is aggravating the harms, they're aggravating the tension between China and Taiwan, right? And we really believe, on site closing, we really believe that what these Taiwanese people, the function of history is to learn from them and not to sit up and not to use them to harm what Taiwan is today. And second of all, he was talking about how the intervention of China would suppress the freedom of speech and whatever freedom that the Taiwanese people have today, right? We believe that actually the existence of China, if let's say China and Taiwan are one, it would actually protect Taiwan and give them a security of backup instead of what they're advocating, taking away the rights. Taiwanese people have rights, as we see today. They're still there. They are doing really, really fine. Okay, moving on to my point, right? Okay, so the question that we have to really ask is Taiwan ready? Sit down. Is Taiwan ready to be on its own? And we believe that once the proposal that comes from opposition passes, right, it will cause us an economic effect. Between the opening government, they were talking about how it would affect economically by other countries not wanting to invest, right? A site closing is coming up with a different perspective to look into it. Sit down, I'll take you later. First and foremost, let's analyze how the economy in Taiwan works, right? The economy in Taiwan is basically very reliant on exports. It's a very export-oriented country and depends very highly on world trade regime.